turn, that's harder work. He did it, reward him. Drop the reins, let him relax, let him walk in a straight line. Okay? Now we're pulling pretty wide in the beginning. We're really showing this horse where to go. We're putting pressure on the left side of his mouth, saying, bend your nose to the left, Blackie. Let's go left. And when he does, you drop the pressure to reward him for doing that. Okay? Now what did we say about teaching him both directions? We got to go back and teach him to turn to the right, don't we? So we pull out here to the right, and we teach him to bend his nose a little bit. He's not as smooth and fluid to the right. Okay? He wants to argue a little bit more. Doesn't bend quite as easily. Not quite as fluid and stepping across. So right now we can see that this horse bends better to the left and is a little freer and a little softer going to the left. This way, he still argues a little. There, he gave his nose a little bit. That's really what we want, is we want him to learn to bend and to give his nose when we take a hold of it. Okay? So if he's going to argue, are we going to give up? No, we're going to do more of it. So we're going to say, give us your nose, bud. Bend your nose around here, and when you bend, then I'll give it back to you. When you bend, I'll give it back to you. When you bend, I'll give it back. Now this little step right here usually should be day one of colt breaking. So many horses have not had this step done to them. And they get to be 5 or 10 years old and they still will not bend, will not flex. They argue, they won't give their face. They're like a belligerent little kid that hasn't learned day one lessons, okay? So it's very hard to build on a horse that hasn't learned step one. So step one is to give, bend, flex, and turn a little bit, okay? Now that's not too hard for a horse to figure out. You know, it's just direct rein. I pull him to the right to get him to turn to the right. See how he argues a little bit to the right? Wants to shake his head and wrestle around a little bit. Okay, that's arguing. So am I going to let go when he shakes his head and pulls? No. I'm going to hold on and say, Blackie, shake your head all you want. When you argue, I'm not going to let go. And when you get soft, then you get to walk straight forward. Okay? So we need to soften him up a little bit to the right, don't we? Because he's arguing a little bit to the right. What does a horse's head do when he resists? Does it go up or does it go down? If you can figure that out, you'll see this horse is pretty soft to the left. And so when we pick up on him to the left, he tends to give a little better. And he'll a lot of times drop his head when he submits and gives. To this direction, he's still got his head up in the air and he wants to wrestle and fight. And so he hasn't really submitted and given to the right side of his mouth very good yet. And so when a horse resists, typically their head goes up. When a horse submits and gives in, typically their head goes down. Okay, now I'm probably taking this horse in smaller circles than I would one the first day. Because I'm asking this horse a little bit more. You know, I'm saying, Blackie, come on, give your face, buddy. You know, you're supposed to know how to do this, but you're not doing it. So you just go back to day one. When a horse has a problem and he wants to argue and resist, you don't go get a bigger bit. You don't go pull harder. You don't get mad and fight. You don't go get the club. You say, day one, bud, learn to bend, learn to flex. I'm going to pull on your little mouth until you learn to bend and flex and give. And when you do that, I will turn you loose. There. There he dropped his head and quit fighting a little bit. Okay? We'll try that again. I'm going to take a hold of him. There. Okay? There. Now look where his head's going. As he learns to submit, this horse will learn to drop his head and give in a little bit. So he's not up in the air wrestling around. He has to think about it. So we're not hurting him, we're not jerking him, we're not beating him over the head, but we're teaching him to drop his head and neck simply by playing softly in his mouth and teaching him to give. Okay? So if your horse is one of those sky gazers that wants to root his nose around and throw his head up and look at the clouds and, you know, the rain goes in his nose when it rains, you need to do a lot of this. A lot of bending, a lot of flexing, a lot of making him give and get soft and get supple in both sides of his mouth. Okay? Now this looks pretty boring, but you'll find that trainers that start colts will do this by the hour to those colts. And even trainers who have finished horses that have maybe won the world, this may be the first thing they do every day when they get on that horse, is they'll test that horse just to see if he still remembers lesson 1. If he's forgotten lesson 1, then you go back to lesson 1 before you start to teach lesson 2 or 3 or 4 or wherever you are in your training program. He's got to have lesson 1 firmly ingrained in his head before you can go on and try to do more advanced stuff. Okay? Now you can do this a long time with a horse. He's not getting tired. He's not getting mad. He's not getting hurt. And so we really don't terrorize his mind. We don't terrorize his body. We just teach him to bend and flex, and we're working on his mind more than we are his body. Okay? Now when we do this, see how this horse is actually learning to go around in a circle a little bit. This horse is learning to step across. Okay? So we're teaching this horse to turn already on day 1 kind of just by pulling his nose around.